Hello. Hi. Um, I'm glad I have three of you. What I might do is make a note to give you guys, especially if you stick around the whole time, 10 points instead of five for being with me today. I appreciate that. We're covering the Constitution, right? The assignment on the Constitution. So, as always, I begin by asking, are there any questions or comments? All right. Could I get a thumbs up? Are we good up to this assignment? Everything okay?
Are we gonna get a chance to go over it today, like what your requirements are and exactly
Absolutely.
like how you want it?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing today.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
So what I'll do, Maricela, is I'll jump right into it. Okay. So you have the Constitution copied and pasted on this document. You also have it in the back of your textbook. Okay. Mireya, good to have you. Um, so let's see here. So notice what I have as my three categories. Enlightened. Any element to this Constitution that is ostensibly designed to prevent tyranny. This includes methods of checks and balances of one branch of the government over another. Any measure intended to ensure transparency so that you see what those governing are up to, right? Or accountability of officials to the people or others. Limitations to discretionary powers of rulers, and any powers vested in the most democratically elected body, the House of Reps. A blatant example of this is the Bill of Rights, ensuring citizens' basic rights and freedom. All right, so we'll get into that. Then, secondly, the second category that I want you to have four examples of is conservative. Any element to this Constitution that seems to conserve early modern or medieval notions, like the following: power vested in a better sort or an elite entrusted to use its own discretion, without much accountability to the governed, power centralized in a strong central government agency like a unitary government, as opposed to deliberately weakened and decentralized, what the libertarians of that time wanted. And remember, libertarian, you fear and distrust government. You wanted it small and accountable as possible, and weak deliberately. Limited democracy, ruled by the demos, or the people, and strong executive and military resources that can curtail or cut short individuals' freedoms in the name of order and stability. So, an example of this is that only one half of one branch originally consisted of properly elected officials, the House of Reps. That's it. And only by those granted citizenship status. All right. And so we'll get into that. Pragmatic is a third category. Inherently amoral. So it doesn't consider morality. It doesn't consider liberal or conservative or enlightened. It simply is designed for expediency, for pragmatism, right? Like whatever yields a good practical result. As a compromise between disparate factions, right? A faction is a group of like-minded individuals that share the same ideology and the same self-interest, or designed to address exigencies that may arise in the future. An example of this, sadly, may be the tacit acceptance of slavery to placate the planter faction and ensure their ratification of the document. All right. So I gave some examples, but let's take a look instead of just going straight to my examples. And I'd like you to have your own examples. Now, if you happen to agree with one or two of mine that I put on here, then so be it. But please notice how I give a brief description as to why. So this first one here, this is enlightened because, and just notice I just used one sentence that suffices for me. All right. But I want you to give the article and the section, and I want you to give four examples under each of the three categories. So notice here, Article 1, Section 2. So let's take a look real quickly through the document itself. All right, so the preamble: we the people of the US, in order to form a more perfect union, and then go to the end, do ordain and establish this Constitution. So that's popular sovereignty, right? The preamble is espousing popular sovereignty, that we the people give our permission for this new government to exist over us, right? And remember, we talked about that with John Locke and Rousseau, the consent of the governed. So notice, right, sovereignty, or where does power or authority emanate from? Ostensibly, it emanates from us, the people, who give our consent. And 9 of the 13 states had to ratify this, had to approve it, right? So that would be considered enlightened right off the bat. But notice the reasons for it. In order to form a more perfect union, remember the Confederation was a little bit chaotic, so they wanted more order and more centralized unity. I would argue that that's conservative. Establish justice. That's an old reason for wanting government, to ensure that anarchy doesn't exist and to secure law and order. I would say that's conservative. Ensure domestic tranquility, very similar. I would say that's conservative. Provide for the common defense. I would say that's conservative. Promote the general welfare, conservative, right? You want to secure law and order. And and then look at the very last one. And finally, there's an enlightened reason, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our future, right? So only in the last reason for which they're stating they're making this government do they give an enlightened reason to secure our liberties, right? So all legislative powers, so all lawmaking powers are vested in a Congress. It shall consist of a Senate and a House. We'll get into that. Let's see here. So the House of Reps shall be chosen by the members shall be chosen every second year. So only 2-year tenures, right? That's pretty enlightened. You only have 2 years, right, to show your qualifications as a House rep. And then 2 years later, you have to run for reelection. So that to me, that's, you're elected by the people and you are only serving a 2-year term. That's enlightened to me. That's holding them accountable, right? No person shall be a representative shall not have attained to the age of 25. I arguably, and you could disagree with me under what section you put something, but to me, I want to know why, even if it's a single sentence. And sometimes I'm educated by you, and I think, wow, I wouldn't have put it into that category, but that's an interesting point. So I subjectively find number 2 to be pragmatic. I think that's just a practical thing, that they want people to be at least 25 years old before they serve as a House rep. Okay, let's see here. So they'll go by apportioned numbers, shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service or indentured servants for a term of years, and excluding Native Americans not taxed, and 3/5 of all other persons. And we all know that 3/5 of all other persons refer to slaves, right? So to me, that's very conservative. The House reps are not chosen by all people, right? But they're making it clear that citizens alone shall determine who shall elect the House reps, and the citizens will not include Native Americans, and they will not include slaves. So much for universal citizenship under Article 1, Section 3, right? I subjectively think that's very conservative. All right. Let's see here. When vacancies happen, right? God forbid a House rep person pass away or become ill to the point of incapacity to serve. The executive authority, which is the president, right, the executive branch, shall issue writs of election to fill the vacancies. I think that's pragmatic. That's just a practical thing to put in there just in case that should happen. They shall choose their speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment. I find Article 5 or Section 5 to be enlightened. Each branch, said Montesquieu, ought to have its own autonomous powers, right? And so the House of Reps, they get to decide upon their own leaders and choose their own speaker. The president can't decide unilaterally, I want this person to be the Speaker of the House. That's in the system of checks and balances, I would say. and they have the power of impeachment, right? To impeach the president. And with that power of impeachment, it's a formal accusation of having committed a high crime or misdemeanor. And then it goes to the Senate, according to this document, and they decide whether they're going to remove the president or not. I definitely think that's an example of checks and balances, that last part of part 5. And I think that's enlightened, right? Number 1 on section 3, the Senate of the U.S. shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, only 2 from an entire state, and they're chosen by the state legislator, not directly elected by citizens. I find that personally to be conservative. That's not very democratic, right? So let's see here. Number 2, it says they'll be divided equally as may be into 3 classes. So the seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the second year, of the second class at the expiration of the 4th year, and of the third class at the expiration of the 6th. Yes, Mireya.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For this assignment that's due tomorrow, so do we have to summarize the whole Constitution, or
No,
do we just choose portions?
you just choose portions. And that's a valid question, and I hope everyone heard my
Of
Yeah, see how I gave you examples here, hon? So see, 4 examples of enlightened,
Yeah.
Article 1, Section 2, Article 1, Section 5. So I just picked and chose different sections.
Okay.
Yeah, so absolutely, you need not
Oh.
summarize the whole document. Yeah, so this part right here, it was meant to serve as an
Okay.
example of your answers. All of this,
Oh, I see now.
yeah, see?
Okay. Yeah, because I was like, I scrolled through it and I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? I was a little confused at first.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Chances are my answer to your question helped at least someone else in your class. So I'm glad you asked it. All
Okay.
right. So yeah, you
Right,
need
thank you.
not, no problem. You need not summarize the whole document. That's okay. You don't need to do that. All you need to do is just pick and choose. Okay. But no, that's a good question. That's a helpful question for the rest of the students to make it more clear what I'm expecting, what I'm asking of you. So to me, number 2, right? I think that's an example of pragmatism. I subjectively think so. Is, I think of like a soccer team, a basketball team, etc. Right? They're saying that they don't want to put in 5 starters on their basketball team and then take all 5 out and put in possibly 5 new people elected after that who have no experience in the Senate. They want 1/3 every 2 years, 1/3 of the senators to have to run for reelection. Then the next 2 years, the other third has to run. Then the next 2 years, the other third has to run. So at any given time, you have 2/3 of your senators have had some experience in the Senate. So I like I said, some of this is subjective, but I find that to be pragmatic. It's not necessarily conservative or liberal or enlightened, but to me, it's practical. All right. And the same thing with the next section. No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained to the age of 30. They feel, right, that there has to be a certain amount of years, certain number of years that the person has experienced life, has interacted with people, has experienced socialization, right? Perhaps has been educated, etc. And they feel like someone as young as 29 years of age has not yet seen enough of life, has not interacted enough with people, has not been sufficiently socialized in society to perhaps be the best he or she could possibly be. So hence an age requirement again for the upper house of the legislator. All right, let's see here. They choose their own officers. I'm going to 5. Okay, I might skip 1 every now and then. I hope you don't mind. In the absence, and also a president pro tempore in the absence of the vice president or when he shall exercise the office of the president. And so I think those are just practical, pragmatic exigencies that might occur, and that they want to be ready for that in case an office is vacated. And then number 6, the Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments, right? So they get to decide whether to remove the president or not. I find that personally to be enlightened. It's in the spirit of Montesquieu, right? A spirit of checks and balances, whereby one branch of the government has some checks or powers over another branch to prevent tyranny, right? But notice it takes 2/3 vote to have the president expelled. So let's see here. I'm going to skip to number 2 there under section 4. Congress shall assemble at least once every year. In the early modern period, and goodness knows the medieval time period before that, the king or queen had the power to convene parliament or not, and had the power to shut it down. And now they're saying, no, this Congress is autonomous. It has some of its own independent powers separate from the president, from our chief executive, from our king or queen, if you will. And they must meet at least once a year. And so I find that to be enlightened, right? They want this half democratically elected Congress to have to meet and to address issues that the people need addressed. And I'm sorry, if that ding is emblematic of someone having a question, please chime right in, okay? I'm not sure what that ding represents. You must have a quorum to do business, so you must have a certain percentage of the House reps and senators present to be able to have an official meeting. So you could argue that that's enlightened in some ways, because you want to make sure that whatever laws they pass are representative of the will of the people, right? Of what the people want. And if a lot of the people's reps are not present, then they're not there to serve as the mouthpiece, right? As the spokesman for their constituents in their congressional district. But you could also say that that's practical, right? And so that could go to either one of those, I believe, necessitating a quorum, a certain percentage of them present. Each house may determine the rules of its own proceedings, punish its own members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3 can expel a member from the House or Senate. So I see elements of that seem to be enlightened there, where they're holding one another accountable, right, for his or her behavior. And I see elements of enlightenment in which each department, right, the legislator we're talking about in this case is virtually autonomous, has its own independent powers. Then look at number 3 under section 5. Each house shall keep a journal of its proceedings and from time to time publish the same, right? So you have the right to publish, they must publish the journal of its proceedings. So to me, that cries of transparency, right? Where we get to see what our elected reps are up to, what they're voting yay and nay on, and what's going on, right? I find that personally to be enlightened. But look at this, accepting, with the exception of such parts as may in their judgment require secrecy. So they can make exceptions and keep things from the public as far as who's voting for what and what's being discussed, etc. I clearly think that subjectively is conservative, right? So moving on here. They shall receive compensation for their services. Again, is that pragmatic? Is that just practical that our elected and unelected reps receive salaries? That's how are they to pay their bills, etc. Right? So I mean that's the practical side that I see in that. The fact that they're getting wages, however, some people who adhere to the Roman sense of civic virtue find that to be conservative, that if you really are filled with civic virtue, you ought to be able to serve without any payment.
Can I
And-
comment on that one?
I'm sorry? Yeah, please.
I just have a comment.
Sure.
For that, I think the payment part is somewhat, it's needed. Otherwise, you're going to have independently wealthy people making decisions for everyone.
I like that. I like that. And see, just stating your reason for that, and just seemingly a simple sentence that you just articulated, it makes me see your point. So absolutely, lady. Lady, do you have a question or comment? If you do, by all means, chime in. All right. Well, as I continue, lady, if you want to chime in, please unmute yourself, and I'll be happy to hear from you.
I'm looking late. I'm here.
Okay, you got it. You got it. Yeah, your
Okay.
name popped up. I just wrote your name down and Yesenia's. So I'm glad to have you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Through such time. So notice number 2 of section 6 is you can't serve in 2 different offices of 2 different branches simultaneously. When you see this in England's history in the early modern era, oftentimes it was intertwined with stories of corruption, of people acquiring separate offices at once. And then oftentimes you could find yourself whereby you're going to have a conflict of interest, right? Whereby utilizing 2 different offices, you could help some type of legislation that lines your pocketbook. So I believe in the spirit of that time that arguably number 2 under section 6 is enlightened, making sure that that people don't have that opportunity to take advantage of the public coffers of the political system for their own enrichment, and again the whole system of checks and balances. And so I subjectively find that one to be enlightened. 7, section 7, all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Reps. Remember, we cried out during the War for Independence, no taxation without consent, without representation. So we're practicing what we preach here, right? Anytime that we're taking money from the citizens' pockets, it has to emanate from the elected reps in the House of Reps. So I find that to be enlightened, right? And then, of course, in the spirit of checks and balances, look at 2. Before it becomes a law, if it's passed by both the House and the Senate by a simple majority, it must be presented to the president. If he or she shall sign it and shall return it with objections to the House to which it has originated, shall enter the objections at large in the journal, and they shall proceed to reconsider it. If after reconsideration 2/3 of the House or the Senate or both agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent together with the objections to the other house and be reconsidered. If 2/3 of that house passes it, it becomes law. So you're looking at the veto power. So the veto power on its own, it's arguably conservative in that the royal power always had power for centuries to veto, to nullify a law passed by the legislator or by parliament. But the fact that they could override it with a 2/3 majority, even if the president says no, I definitely subjectively think that is enlightened in the spirit of checks and balances, right? So the popular legislator, the somewhat popular legislator, because senators were chosen by the state reps, not by the people, and not even by the citizens as a select group. So that's just me. All right. Let's see here. Shall be approved. Okay, same thing here. Now, Article 1, Section 8. You have to remember, right, that arguably this entire section 8 of Article 1 on the legislator is in some ways it's practical, I think, and in other ways it is, so hence pragmatic, but in other ways it's conservative when you look at it in historical context, that in the past, the central government did not have a lot of these powers under the Confederation, and now it does. So to lay and collect taxes. So now the constituency of citizens are organized into numbers of 30,000. And that doesn't seem very democratic, does it? You have one voice, one person, one vote for 30,000 civilians, right? That's certainly not direct democracy. And some would argue that that's a little bit weak as far as even representative democracy. But you have one rep elected in the House for every 30,000 civilians. And now if your rep says no, but a majority of the reps in Congress, right, say yes, then that tax passes. And so they called this, it seems like a misnomer today because you're going by the majority of representatives, but they called it coercive tax power because now you can't just simply have your own voice, your own elected constituent, your own elected rep say no, and the tax can't be collected in your region as you could under a confederation. Now, if a majority of them pass it, it doesn't matter if your 30,000 person rep said yes or no, that tax is to be collected. And so in the context of that day, the libertarians did not like that. So it seemed a little bit conservative. To borrow money on the credit of the US, some find that to be conservative also, that the central government has power to print money, to borrow money, right? To regulate trade or commerce with foreign countries and among the several states and with the Native American sovereign tribes. So again, the central government, it seems a little bit conservative. The central government has a lot of powers economically, right? But again, some would say that these are very practical issues to be able to borrow money, that is a practical necessity. Someone needs to regulate trade between the states, etc. All right, so some would say pragmatic. To establish a uniform rule of naturalization. So Congress gets to decide on immigration, right? With naturalization and uniform laws on bankruptcies. Some would say that's practical. Again, that's a practical necessity that needs to be tackled by the federal government. To coin money, regulate the value thereof, fix the standard of weights and measures. And of course, we didn't choose the metric system like Europe. Some would say that's very pragmatic, that's very practical and needs to be done. Others would say it is conservative because the central government alone has the power to do that now. No longer are we in a confederacy. All right. Provide for the punishment of counterfeiting and the production of coinage. And so some again would say that's conservative. Some again would say that's pragmatic, that's practical. Post offices and roads, right? A patent system, number 8. Again, practical or conservative. To constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, because when we get to Article 3, it just deals with the Supreme Court. But so Congress shall constitute the tribunals that are below the Supreme Court. So some would say that's enlightened, that it's in the spirit of checks and balances amongst the separate branches. So if someone has a question or comment, go ahead and just unmute yourself, okay? And I'll be happy to hear from you. To define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas. Mireya, please.
It's not really a question, but in the comments, somebody said that the ding is more people joining, I guess.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know that. Yeah, I tell you what, I'm Generation X. That's my excuse. I'm much older than the millennials, and I'm a lot of this I'm still trying to appropriate myself, and so I had no idea what those dings were. That makes me feel better. Thank you. All right, and so when I'm done, Thank you. Yeah, when I'm done, I'll look back over the list and make sure that there aren't other people that I haven't included. To provide and maintain a navy, right? Uh, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. The invasion part, right? Some would say that that's very pragmatic. So the state militia under the Scottish Enlightenment was meant to stay decentralized and democratic. Each region to have its own system of voluntary participation in the protection of that region, right? And they get to elect their own local officers in the army. They get to meet oftentimes at least a couple times a month and train just for any possible exigency, any kind of an emergency that pops up, right? But now we have a central government whereby Congress says, nope, Alabama, California, etc., we are appropriating your state's militia, and we're going to use it to repel an invasion of the United States. Some would say again that that is very pragmatic. That's practical. That needs to be on there because you're dealing with contingency here, right? You're dealing with what ifs. The founding fathers did not pretend to be, prophets, prophetic. And so they were trying to think of possible things that could arise as major issues and threats to the Union, to our republic, right? And so hence they're trying to make forth the institutional framework to deal with those possible emergencies that could arise. But then to suppress an insurrection, remember an insurrection, sometimes that is a little bit of a nebulous term, a rebellion, right? When does a healthy protest, right, constitute or turn into an outright rebellion, whereby, you have people refusing to pay a tax like the Whiskey Rebels, right? Under the first administration of George Washington. They were angry over the whiskey tax and they refused to pay it. And when they were threatened to be brought to the court of law for their rebellion, they threatened violence, right? So the president began demanding Congress, or asking Congress to appropriate the state militias and use those state militiamen or soldiers to go and travel to the area where the Whiskey Rebellion was centered and to fight against fellow Americans, against who were reported to be at this point rebels to the Republic, right? And so others would say that is extremely conservative. All right, organizing, arming, disciplining the militia and armed forces, right? In case of a war and declaring war, right? Congress has that power. Well, again, the president is not technically directly democratically elected by popular vote, but the House reps are. So some would say that it's enlightened that the most democratically elected branch, Congress, should have power to declare war, to raise an army, etc. And then, as you probably know, in Article 2, once war is declared, once the army has been assembled and trained, then it's handed over temporarily under the leadership of the commander-in-chief, who is the president. So some would say that's a good system of checks and balances, and that arguably is enlightened. But other people would say that it's practical, right? That you look at history and wars are very prevalent chronologically along the chronological narrative. And so hence you better be prepared for that possibility. And then others would even say that it's conservative again, that the central government, not the states, takes over in time of a rebellion, an invasion, or a congressionally declared war. So you have wiggle room on this assignment, all right, whereby you might put something under a different category than I might subjectively put it. That's why I ask, at least in one sentence, defend why you say that particular section and article, in your estimation, is enlightened or is conservative or is pragmatic. And then number 18, I would argue, is I subjectively find it to be conservative. to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So you have enumerated or specifically stated powers that Congress now has, much more powerful than a confederation than we had before, right? Under this list of what they can now do legally. But then the bottom one is almost like a blank check to the libertarians, right? It's scary to them. Okay, it's also saying that they shall do whatever is necessary and proper to carry out whatever is listed on this list. But again, other people would say, no, that's practical, that the founding fathers did not pretend to know what was going to arise as problems and challenges and obstacles in the future of the republic. And they wanted to give a little wiggle room, a little latitude to Congress and to be able to do practical things that aren't specifically stated on that list. So again, number 18, some would say is conservative, others would say is pragmatic or practical. So the writ of habeas corpus, number 2 under section 9, to be able to have, and then how could I forget number 1? The migration or importation of such persons as in any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808, right? But a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person. So notice they're no longer saying property, they're saying persons, but they're deliberately staying vague, aren't they? They're talking about slaves and the slave trade. So Congress can't do a thing about stopping the slave trade until the year 1808, and it was 1787. So they're giving themselves, right? 21 years of an inability to do anything about the slave trade. So again, some people would say that that's pragmatic, that for at least 20 years, there's going to be such a demand with land extensions into the West from all 13 states, that there's going to naturally arise a higher demand for slaves, and they want to placate or please the Southern representatives. And so hence they're giving them this as a concession, as a pragmatic or amoral concession. And then others would say this clearly is conservative. All right. And number 2, it starts off the writ of habeas corpus, literally to have a body present, right? You have to be able, this is the beginning of your due process rights if you're convicted of a crime. So you have to be present. And then, and then we have in the Bill of Rights, the extension of this right of due process to be represented legally, right? To be able to countermand or challenge whatever your hostile witnesses say against you, they claimed that you're guilty of, right? And to have a right of a speedy trial and not be languish in a prison waiting for your trial, the right to be properly represented by constituents of your own, largely basically a representative of your demographic, right? Because after all, it was mainly just white men who were declared citizens in all the states initially. So other, quote, working class or perhaps middle class white men get to decide your fate as far as jury selection and the jury's decision. So all of that, right? That's enlightened. That's Beccaria, right? Of the Enlightenment, the rights of suspects. But then it says, unless in the case of rebellion or invasion, then the government can just throw you in and charge you of something in your absence. So the first part of it sounds very enlightened. And then with the exception there, that's very conservative, I would say. So no ex post facto law shall be passed. Some would say that's enlightened. Some would say that's practical. So if it wasn't a law at the time that you committed the crime, but then they make a law claiming that something is illegal, they can't go back and say, well, you committed it back, 2 years ago. Well, no, 2 years ago, it wasn't a law. It wasn't prohibited. So sometimes that happened in early modern Europe, and they wanted to make sure that did not happen. So that arguably is enlightened. And then taxes shall be in proportion to the census. So how much each state pays in taxes is contingent upon its population. Some say that's fair and pragmatic, making sure everyone has kind of an equitable or equal tax burden. Some say that's even enlightened in ensuring that. So let's see here. No preference shall be given by any regulation of commerce or revenue to the ports of one state over those of another. So hence you can't pass laws that help out one port or one region, although you can pass laws that help out one industry over other industries. That's happened, you know, just a myriad of times in our history, but that cannot help out one port or section of the country at the expense of others. That you have to play fair. You have to make sure that everything was equitable as far as taxation, as far as subsidies, etc., from one region to the next. So I would argue that that perhaps is practical, and it also might arguably be considered enlightened. Okay. Excuse me. Look at number 8. No title of nobility shall be granted, right? Excuse me. No title of nobility shall be granted. You know, that with nobility or aristocracy, right? This self-appointed best group, so to speak, right? In quotes, that's not to be allowed here. I think almost under anyone's rubric, number 8 is considered enlightened. That there shall be not be a nobility, a landed nobility here in the U.S. as opposed to England. Then looking at section 10, no state shall enter into a treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make things but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. All this thing, post and ex post facto law, or a law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. Some would say that's pragmatic, that's practical. The states cannot do such things, or that you would have perhaps jurisdictional anarchy if you had different states doing that. Others would contend that that's conservative because it's taking those powers away from the states and reserving it solely to the federal government. So it's kind of section 10, number 1 there is kind of in line with Article 1, section 8. Let's see here. I'm going to move on now to the president. Shall be vested in a president of the U.S. He, sadly, they just put he, not only in the Old English was that just the normal pronoun, but they kind of meant it at that time as far as exclusion of women politically. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the VP or vice president, chosen for the same period to be elected as follows. And it gets into the electoral college system, right? And then with the electoral college, initially, right, you had the number of electors that were, and remember in the first election, you didn't have 2 formal political parties as separate entities like you do now, each party with its own electors. But these electors are actual people, right, at least initially. And so the number of electors is equivalent to the number of congressmen that each state has. So to this day, you know, California has the most, is worth the most electoral points because of its population. What do we have? We have like about 20 million people here in California. And so at any rate, if you get 1 rep for every 30,000 people and you get 2 senators, no matter what, you just count the number of House reps plus senators, and that's the number of electors that you have. Then you have a popular vote amongst the citizens, sadly, just those who are considered citizens at that time. Because remember, not until the 14th Amendment, much later after the Civil War, do you have universal citizenship for men and women. And actually, not even that for women yet under the 14th Amendment, but universal citizenship just for men, sadly, in 1868. And then finally, by 1920, women are included, but with particular the privilege to vote and participate in government and run for office. And because of that, some women still believe there needs to be an Equal Rights Amendment, an ERA, but that is yet to pass. Others contend that it's self-explanatory through the 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920, that women are entitled, as under the 14th Amendment, to all the rights, protections, and privileges of citizenship. So we're far from that, right? So just those declared citizens, the white property owning men, basically, in each of the states, they get together, they vote for a presidential, elector, and whoever they vote for, that person's choice of electors, equivalent to the number of congressmen in that state, goes to the Capitol and votes that actual number. So what do we have, like 58 or something like that points here in California? And so at any rate, we've had cases more than once whereby one person won a majority of votes, but did not have a majority of electoral points and lost. So you could win by popular vote and still lose, right, for president. So it's not a direct election. So I would argue that this kind of convoluted, complex system is arguably conservative. It's deliberately kind of shielding the presidential candidates from just direct, simple, majoritarian decision. The electors of the states have to be inhabitants of the states. Remember, that was stated in Article 1 of the Congressman also. I would argue that that's both practical and enlightened, right? That you have to inhabit or have a home and live in the county that you're representing, and hence know what it's like, hence be accountable to the people there by living there. Very, very complex. I'm going to go past that if you don't mind. Look at number 5. No person except a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible for the office of president. So a naturalized immigrant cannot become president under Article 2, Section 5. Yikes, right? And has to be at least 35 years of age. Of course, the founding fathers would argue that that was pragmatic, that there were practical reasons for that. But I think a lot of people today would put that into the category of conservative. And then again, possibly pragmatic, number 6, if the president is to be removed or God forbid something happens to the president health-wise, right? The vice president is to take over. And so to me, I find that to be pragmatic or practical. The president shall be compensated, receive a salary, and that salary cannot be increased or diminished or decreased. So Congress can't manipulate the president by dropping his or her salary, for instance, or try to bribe the president by increasing his or her salary. So you could make an argument, arguably, for any of the 3 categories on that one, section number 7. And then look at number 8. Before the president enters the office, he or she shall take an oath of affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the president of the U.S. and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So number 8, I think, would arguably be contended by the founding fathers to be enlightened, right? In the spirit of checks and balances, in the spirit of accountability, the president must serve the Constitution. And the Constitution is written, it's universal, it plays no favorites, it's supposed to be colorblind, etc. And so hence that was meant to be an enlightened or liberal component, right? Keeping the president accountable to the Constitution. So I'll get it for you after. So that he or she is accountable, right? And cannot, the term they used often was arbitrary power, right? You have arbitrary power. You could do however you please, right? You know, put it on a silly note, you have a dog, you know, a cute little chihuahua or something. You could do as you please as far as, you know, making and breaking your own rules that the dog is to abide by and so forth. In some ways, you have almost arbitrary power over your pet. They didn't want mankind to be held sway under any other fellow man's arbitrary power, to just do as he or she whimsically desires. Section 2, the president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the U.S. and of the militia of the states when called into service, when Congress basically declares war. So that's the spirit of checks and balances, right? Congress raises the army, trains the army, declares war, then the president executes the final authority over the armed forces when war has been declared. So is that enlightened? Is it conservative? It's a single person. And historically, it's been a single rich man with that kind of power over the armed forces during war. Then is this practical here? The president has power to make treaties, but then 2/3 of the senators must agree or concur with those treaties. Shall nominate Supreme Court judges, ministers, and consuls. So what we consider the cabinet, right? The Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of the State, diplomatically, right? All these different major offices. And of course, the bureaucracy has grown tremendously in time from the first administration. The cabinet was relatively small under George Washington, but some would say that's even worse, right? It's less representative of the people. And these are men and women chosen unilaterally by the president, but yet not completely unilaterally, right? Because Senate must approve. So that approval of the Senate might be considered enlightened. But the fact that the president can handpick Supreme Court justices, again, that could be in the spirit of Montesquieu, of checks and balances. One branch, right, has power to nominate members of another branch of the Supreme Court justices, but also it's pragmatic, it's practical. Someone needs to, because they decided, right, that the Supreme Court was not to be beholden to the majority. They felt that the legislator was already beholden to the majority, that to a limited extent, the president and vice president and cabinet would be considered accountable to the people by way of just a 4-year term and the electoral college system and elections. And so they felt like someone needs to defend the rights of the numerical minority, right? The less than 50%. And it ought to be a group that does not have to run a popularity contest, who'd be handpicked for life. And that would be the Supreme Court. So the president, is it practical? Is it even enlightened that the leader of a separate branch gets to handpick them? But remember, judges were handpicked by chief executives in the persons of kings and queens for centuries. So some people, that's very conservative. So let's see here. Section 3, from time to time, the president shall give Congress information on the state of the union. To me, this is the spirit of transparency, allowing Congress to know what he or she is up to as president, communicating with them, right? Collaborating with them, and recommend for their consideration such measures that the president shall judge necessary and expedient. Notice, cannot coerce them, but recommend in the State of Union address to Congress what they ought to tackle as key issues and laws. So again, is that in a nice spirit of checks and balances? Some would say so, but not all. And then the president or vice president, right, shall be removed from office on impeachment for conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So hence accountability. And a lot of people would include section 4 at the bottom there as enlightened for that reason. one Supreme Court for the entire country, right? The inferior courts beneath the Supreme Court, the appellate courts, the state and federal level judge court systems, right? We have the different circuit courts, etc., and districts. All that's to be determined by Congress. So kind of in a spirit of checks and balances, Congress gets to decide the lesser court systems, and the president gets to decide the Supreme Court. But look at this, they're handpicked, so they're not directly elected, and they get to serve during good behavior. And that basically is a euphemism for life. So I'm no attorney, so some of this goes above my head, but as far as law and equity basically, right, is like fairness and justice arising under the Constitution, under the laws, right, and then treaties, all cases affecting ambassadors. So you have, right, in cases of a citizen of the United States against another country, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. Citizens of the U.S. against a citizen of another country, not just the country itself, the government itself, also under the original jurisdiction of the of the Supreme Court. Two citizens of separate states, or one citizen of one state against the state itself, in the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So those are under its original jurisdiction, and it is obliged under Article 3 to confront or adjudicate, to referee and decide upon, right, such cases. And then, of course, they have the appeal system. And to this day, they have discretion as to what appeals from the state and district levels that they want to take on, they want to tackle. I can't remember the rate, but it's a little bit almost alarming, the percentage of how many cases that are brought up for appeal to the Supreme Court, the percentage of those appeals that are accepted by the Supreme Court. Because remember, if it's not under its original jurisdiction, it doesn't legally have to address that issue in that case. But I mean, we're talking at least in the system of tens. I want to say anywhere from like 50 to 80 to 1, like at least 50 to 80. I know it's got to be even higher than that. I'm trying to go off memory, and it's been too long since my political science classes. But at least up to 80 cases are denied for every one single case that is accepted. So many elements to the Supreme Court are considered by many people to be conservative. Look at section 2 in Article 4. The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunity as of citizens in the several states. That's short of the 14th Amendment, where it nationalizes the franchise, where it nationalizes the Bill of Rights and all your rights, protections, and privileges of citizenship in every state, no matter what state you move to or born into, etc. But this is a step in that direction, right? Trying to secure the rights, that if you have rights as a citizen in one state, that you have such rights in several states. And there must have been ways in which they can get around Section 2, Part 1 here, because I know it in the case of African Americans, where there were originally about 5 states that gave limited opportunities of citizenship to some, quote, Negro men. But if they moved to a southern state, for instance, no way would they recognize that limited citizenship status. So anyway, the amendments. Look at Article 6 here. All debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of the Constitution shall be as valid against the United States under this Constitution as under the Confederation. So hence, right, if someone owes you money, if you own certain property, that property is still yours. That money is still owed to you after this Constitution, known as the property clause. That definitely is considered conservative. That's in the interest of the well-to-do. And then under Article 5 there, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments. So it's showing the process by which amendments can be made to the original Constitution. And I would argue that that is pragmatic, that that is practical, right? That the Founding Fathers didn't pretend to know the future and know what major issues might arise, and hence gave future generations the opportunities to add amendments to the Constitution to deal with those future exigencies that they could not foresee. And then, of course, the first 10 amendments, right? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the disestablishment clause at first, there's no official state religion separating church and state, but securing the right, the freedom of religious exercise, right? Of religious belief and practice to its citizens. And sometimes that is a juggling act, to be sure. So hence, right, a publicly funded, government-funded school could not have Bible studies or prayer, etc. in school. But if a student wants to have a Bible study and wants to pray in school, then under the second part of that clause, arguably that person has the right of religious expression. But it just can't be run by the government itself, by government employees. Or abridging or cutting short the freedom of speech, of the press, of the right to people to peaceably assemble and petition the government to make good on grievances. So all these amendments that you see here are arguably enlightened, any and all of them, securing basic rights for the individual. The right to bear arms in the Second Amendment. Against the Quartering Act in the Third Amendment. The Fourth Amendment, right? The right to your privacy and to your property, where they can't have unreasonable searches and seizures without a proper warrant or cause, etc., etc. So does anyone have any basic questions? All you're doing is picking and choosing at least 4 examples in this entire Constitution that are enlightened. Give me at least 1 sentence for each of the 4 as to why you consider that clause to be enlightened. Then do that again 4 times under conservative, and do it again 4 times under pragmatic or practical. So is there any longer any ambiguity that kind of holds sway over those 3 categories as far as what I mean by each of them, enlightened, conservative, or pragmatic?
I have some questions, but I came late, so I don't know if it's good.
That's okay, go ahead.
I don't know if this is like some sort of cognitive thing, but I don't know how to do what you're saying. Like to section all these off into, and then just it out of the book, find details that back up because they all, it sounds like potentially from what I came in on, could be a couple different things depending on your perspective or what's like political side you're on.
That's
So
right.
to find details that back up the point that you're.
Yes. So see
Almost
what I
like you're
did
a history
here.
teacher, but you're a history teacher.
All right, so see here, Melissa, see, I have Article 1, Section 2. The House reps are directly elected by citizens every 2 years and must be inhabitants of the districts which they represent. I put that as an example of enlightened. I put this as enlightened because they are frequently held accountable to their constituents via an election, by way of an election, and are privy to what their constituents face daily and having a residence in their county. And then I do it again and again and again, right? Where I give the exact article and section. I cite what I consider to be enlightened, right? So look at the next one. Congress must keep a journal of its proceedings and publish such from time to time. I put this is enlightened because it demands a level of transparency from congressmen so that their constituents could periodically be apprised of what they're up to in congressional sessions. So, like I said, I actually enjoy it when you put something in a different category than I would have put it in. I genuinely do. But all I ask is that at least in the form of one intelligent sentence, you convince me why it should be under that given category. Do you know what I'm saying? So there is latitude. You can end up putting things in a different section than I would have put them in a different category. But the key to it being okay, to me, okay, subjectively, is your reason for it. Even if it's just one intelligent sentence. Briefly give me a description at the end of what it is that you consider to be enlightened, right? The article and section number. Briefly tell me why you think it's conservative, why you think it's enlightened, why you think it's pragmatic. So remember, enlightened is in line with the Enlightenment, whereby there is a sense of accountability, checks and balances, limited government, right? Whereby what a person, a given governmental official can do is pretty much circumscribed. It's limited, right? Anything that does that, I would argue, is enlightened. Conservative is anything that tends to be either very traditional, so like a lot of unelected officials having power, right? Wanting good security and be able to prevent anarchy in any way, that would be considered conservative. So anything that says, right, that you have the right to organize the state militias against a rebellion, to me, that's clearly conservative. But then again, some people would say that's pragmatic, right? Or pragmatic, it's not looking at liberal or conservative or enlightened or, conservative. It's just saying, what if there are practical things that might likely happen? Is there something written in the Constitution that addresses that practical exigency, that practical what if that might happen, right? So again, a rebellion, right? The need to print money, the need to have a post office system, like a lot of the things you find under Article 1, Section 8, I subjectively think are pragmatic. They're very practical, that Congress is given the right to handle those issues. So again, I truly enjoy it when you put something in a different category than I would have put it in, but just please, at least with one intelligent sentence, convince me why. Okay? Just convince me why you put it as enlightened, why you put it as conservative, why you put it as pragmatic. Does that help?
Yes, big time. Thank
Okay,
you.
good. I hope so. No problem. All right. Anybody else?
I had a quick question.
Yes.
So I remember seeing somewhere it says do you want an article for, okay, so it says make sure at least one section from Article 1, from Article 2, and one section from Article 3 is present in one of the 3 categories. Is that like you want one from 1, 2, and 3 per category, or?
No, not per category. That's a great question. I don't want to make it that picky.
Okay.
I wouldn't say tough, because that wouldn't be tough if I asked you to do that, but it would just be more tedious, right? And a little bit more burdensome as far as your time and your resources. No, you do not have to have something from Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 under enlightened. and then do it again under pragmatic and do it again under conservative. To me, that's too much work. Just simply under all three combined. I want
Okay.
to see at least something under Article 1, at least one of the 12 examples, right? Because you have 4 in 3 different categories, so you have 12.
Yeah.
So of the 12, I want at least one in Article 1, at least one in Article 2, and at least one in Article 3.
And that's throughout the 3, right?
That's right. That's throughout
Okay.
the 3, not in each of the 3.
Okay, alrighty, thank you.
You're welcome, Maricela. That's a great question. And I hope that I made that clear for everyone else. So I always want to encourage you to think. I always want you to employ some time and resources, but I'd like to think that I'm not that tough of an instructor. I don't want to give you a heavy burden of work, especially in the summer term that's so condensed. All right. So are there any questions or comments before we conclude? Thank you, Mireya. Okay. Well, I have the 7 of your names down. I think I'm going to give you 10 points for today instead of the regular 5. All right. So I'm very proud of you, and I hope you guys are doing well. Please have patience with me with the grades, okay? The next 2 weeks, I'm putting in my final grades at another school. So, you know, the whole triage thing, they're technically more urgent than yours right now. Not more important, but more urgent. And so have a little understanding, if you would, okay, regarding your grades. Your class is pretty small, so I'd like to think in the next couple of weeks, I could do at least 1, if not even 2 more assignments. But I'm certainly not going to catch up in the next 2 weeks with everything that you've done so far. I have too much to do at my other school and their final grades. Yes, Melissa?
I kind of did catch up. I did email you, but I kind of caught up on some of the assignments. It's weird because I'm showing up to every single recording, but then I'm like getting freaked out to do the work and then turning it in late. So I'm gonna try not to do that. But I still didn't do number 5, and I'm trying to work on that. I don't know how to like put it into words, like what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
So I
well,
might
like
hit
I
the
said,
library.
well, a couple things there, Melissa, is for one, right? I reserve the right in the syllabus to make exceptions to my rules. So normally, right, especially if you're not attending the Zooms, I don't get a message from you and then it's late. That's an automatic 10-point deduction for me, right? That's just kind of my rule. But if you're participating regularly, you're coming to these Zoom meetings and you're telling me you're communicating with me. So I have reason to you have a sense of credibility in my eyes that you're trying to do this work, but you're struggling with it. I
Yes.
reserve the right to not deduct those 10 points. Okay. And I know I've only done about 3 assignments, but the assignments I've done in your case, you're doing better than you think.
Oh,
You're catching the
Thank
gist
you.
of the argumentative assignments more accurately than you're giving yourself credit for. You
Okay.
really are.
okay. I really appreciate that.
No, that's honest.
Okay, thanks.
Professor, we are 8 students, not 7. I just want to make sure that you put me down.
Yes, lady, I have you, hon. I have your name down.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Good luck at
Yeah,
work.
have a great day. Thank
Yeah,
you
thank
so
you.
much for your
Okay,
kindness,
everyone.
mainly.
All right, have a
Thank
good
you.
day,
Bye-bye.
okay?